Dragon Pod from Bending Not Breaking, Book 6, Stars, Chapter 5, Moonless Night. And we're back to another episode of the Dragon Pod with Bending Not Breaking. Thank you so much for listening. I am so excited about this season, this episode in particular. We have an incredible guest for you all today, talking about the mystery of Aaravos, talking about a moonless night, and yet we have a moon shadow elf joining us today, except in the flesh. So Paula Burrows is here, uses she, her pronouns, and describes herself as an actress, dilettante reader, traveler, and sewist. Delightful Human is one of the people that I've been most excited to talk about this season and talk to. And I'm just really excited because you probably know her best for her performance as one of our favorite elves, Rayla, in The Dragon Pence. Paula, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. This is really just great. Excited. I'm curious. People probably have not heard you speak unless they saw you at random Comic Con or something along those lines. But assuming people haven't met you, I would just tell us a little bit about yourself. What makes you you?
Okay, well, I think like the first thing that people notice is that I don't sound quite like Rayla. So I grew up in Canada. I'm originally from Scotland, but moved here when I was quite young. I grew up in a town called Kamloops. I never know what to say when these things get asked. I knew right away that I wanted to be an actor. I pursued that as soon as I graduated from high school. I love to travel. I love to sew. I am always willing to try a new hobby and usually buy all the materials necessary and then give up after a month. That's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed kind of in following you on Instagram is you mentioned liking to travel, and you have I'm just jealous of the of the places that you've been able to go and the pictures that you've kind of published and the art and the scenery of the landscapes and just it's just really amazing. What's a favorite place that you've traveled to, or something that maybe somewhere you want to go back to that you've been already?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's so hard to pick just one place. When I was 18, I spent a year living in Saitama, just outside Tokyo. So Japan is like a pretty special place to me, and it's been now 10 years since I've visited. I've gone back quite a few times, but it's been 10 years. So that's very, very high on my list. And then only a couple of years ago, I took myself on a big trip alone to Peru, and I would say that was the best food and hiking I've ever experienced. And so I would love to share that experience and go back with loved ones.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I also am desperate to see Morocco. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, it's perfect. No, I'm just, it's interesting because I have traveled, but I have not traveled alone, especially for an extended period of time. It's always accompanied with someone.
Hmm.
So, what was the inspiration behind going to Peru kind of on your own?
I think that I had made the plan with an ex-boyfriend. And I still wanted to go even though we weren't together anymore. And I still wanted to experience those things. It had been on my mind for so many years. And I think that's something that happens when you have a non-traditional job structure, is that you
Yeah.
find that people don't have availability that aligns with your availability. Like, I like to plan my time off when the season is quiet in Vancouver, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not going to leave at the busiest time of year, and that doesn't always align with my friends or family's availability. So I just wanted to enjoy it. Also, I am someone that doesn't hate my own company. I like to read a book, I like to have a nice meal and take pictures. And I'm so annoying in museums. I want to read every placard, I want to sit and stare at everything. And going with another human, I feel guilty, like I have to hurry up. So sometimes to get those experiences by myself and go at my own pace is just really pleasurable.
Yeah. Oh, I have this like internal envy of of that, of the descriptions that you're offering there. I aspire to have that kind of comfort. I also have worked non-traditional time frames in terms of my work, and I had a job where I worked primarily with teenagers, and so I worked nights and weekends compared to the rest of my friends. And so
Mm.
on a smaller scale, perhaps I have experienced that. Um, so that's lovely. Thank you for sharing a little bit about you. That's so fun to hear. I'm curious if you can, since this is the first time for the podcast, if you could share just a little bit around just your relationship with the Dragon Prince, kind of generally speaking. Like, how did it find you, or how did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, for those of you that don't know it, it looks like in terms of an audition experience, like we basically get an email, and if it's an animated series that's new, oftentimes there will be a list of characters that you might be suited for, and with varying levels of information about those characters. So I remember the Dragon Prince audition email came in, and it said Rayla, Moon Shadow Elf, possibly Scottish. And I was like, well, I know why my agent sent it to me, possibly Scottish, all right. So I think I got nervous because I'd never auditioned for an animated series before, so I ignored it. And then 2 weeks later, I got the same audition. And that has never happened ever again in my career. It's the only time that an audition has come back. And so I was like, okay, all right. So I did it. I was a wee bit nervous, like chatted with my cousins in Scotland, like, like pretty nervous, I think, but I recorded it and sent it off. And then I think I got called in for a callback. And that was in the room recording. It was fun. And as an actor, you don't really hang on to auditions. You're not like, oh yeah, this is going to be the one. You go, you leave, you don't think about it. Otherwise, you'll just die a death every time you audition.
Yeah, hurts a little more each time.
And then I got a phone call from my agent probably a month after that, and she was like, okay, don't quit your job. But and that was me booked for Rayla, and I had never been on an animated series. It was the first one I had auditioned for. I had gone into auditioning for animation because I was interested in pursuing comedy. There wasn't a lot of comedy happening in Vancouver at that time. And because it's been quite a while now, like this is 2017. Yeah, and I got my agent recommended that an acting teacher come and give me a coaching to prepare me for the first episode. So she sent one of her, well, she connected me with another person in her roster, another actor, and he came in, was fabulous, like great teacher, really empathetic, emotional, lovely, and was like, I auditioned for this too, but I haven't heard anything. You're very lucky. Anyways, first table read, my teacher was Jason Simpson, who obviously Lord Viren. Yes, so dear friend now, but yeah, it was pretty exciting. I was so nervous.
Wow, that's so cool. What a
Yeah,
fun experience.
yeah, it was great. It was amazing. You know.
Serendipity. That's super cool. Amazing. That's like what a great story. That's what. Oh man. Okay, I'm just in awe. That's so fun. Well, that's great. I would love to kind of take that even a little further. And who knows if you have something in memory of, I'm not sure when you recorded this, but I'm sure it was like a couple years ago almost, where you were recording season 6. But if you recall, kind of thinking about you as this primal source, is there anything that you remember about the making of this particular episode where I think this is the first time we hear you sing? I'm just
Hopefully
like,
the only time.
but yeah, do you remember anything, any fun facts about the making of this episode?
I do remember. So when we get the episodes, they are generally emailed to us maybe the day before we record, maybe a couple of days. It depends. Depends on the season, depends on where the writers are at. Sometimes there's changes, right until the day of. So we're not getting a script until the day of. And I have a bit of a ritual. Sit out on my balcony with my cup of tea, eat my breakfast and read it because, when it's like, a novel of your favorite book, we don't know what's happening. I don't have a timeline of what's going to happen in future episodes. So I get this episode, and I notice that there's an MP4 attached to it, and I'm like, oh, or MP3, and I'm like, well, I don't like the look of this. Because I think we had maybe done the birthday song potentially.
Yeah, I don't recall, but there was the birthday of what, season 3 maybe?
Yeah, so anyways, so I wasn't too nervous, but then I get reading and I'm like, what? You want me to sing? And I panicked. I can't sing. I cannot sing at all. When I was in theater school, I nearly failed the semester where a singing performance was part of how you pass that semester. Like, I don't do karaoke, I don't sing in the shower, I do not sing. And I was like, Aaron, what the hell? Like, I was like, what is this? And I was like, what are they thinking? And then I was like, well, maybe someone else is going to sing it. But I was like, I know these people. They don't care if Rayla can sing. She's singing whether she's good at it or not. And I went to my friend's who was a musician, and he took the recording because they did send me someone else singing in it. It was a beautiful lullaby, and I was like, well, she sounds great. And I think that a friend of mine, like had to play around with the music and drop it an octave and used his guitar and like tried to help me. And he was like, don't worry, they'll auto tune it. And I was like, you don't know these people. They're not going to auto tune it. It's what I'm going to put in is what it's going to be. So yeah, it's probably the most scared I've ever been to record anything ever. Like I would say the only thing I can compare it to was walking into my first episode, I was so nervous, and I'm going to be honest, I kind of resisted watching the season for a really long time because I was scared. I was scared to hear myself. I don't know what, like, we don't see it in advance. Like, I don't see it until it's on Netflix. So, yeah, that's an anecdote. But the creators of our show are so warm, and it's, the creators that come in and direct us, right? And um there was time. We worked on it for a while. They gave me lots of tries. They waited till my nerves settled. Yeah, it was a really good experience in facing a fear, I would say.
Cool. Yeah, I that's there's a lot of vulnerability in singing in and of itself, much less singing for a Netflix audience.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I feel that. That's a big thing. I appreciate you doing it because it's I think it's beautiful. So I love that. I think that I was a voice major in college, so I was thinking about just like I remember there's a similar story um, with Avatar: The Last Airbender where Mako had to sing, and it was he used to say like I can't sing, but like he did it anyway, and it was one of the most heartfelt moments of the entire show. So I think that this is a really neat moment. I appreciate you sharing the vulnerability there. That's a lot.
Thank you.
Well, that kind of invites us in to start thinking about this episode a little bit more intentionally. And, we were kind of going back and forth around potential lenses to discuss the episode through. And ultimately, you kind of landed on this lens of repair or reparation. And I'm curious if you could give me a headline on, like, why, and then also kind of what it means to you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, especially with this show, the first thing I think of is like the reparation of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is most potent when we look at the relationship between Viren and Soren in this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you know, also there's the idea of wanting reparation but not always getting it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when we look at the storyline with the behemoth, we can think about, you know, we think things need to be done a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And for real reparation or real repair, sometimes we need to think about things through another point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm reminded of Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a brilliant author, but he talks about reparations, and I think he defines it as the full acceptance of our collective biography and its consequences. And the way that you just phrased that made me think of that, because the collective, it's not just one person's perspective, right? It's this collective biography where we all have to contribute to this understanding, where any one perspective is not enough to see the problem in and of itself. It requires this multi-directional perspective, um, and that's definitely visible in this episode, right? It's so interesting. So yeah, I appreciate that. Like, oh, there's so much I gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
Can't jump ahead. Okay, well, is there? I'm curious if there's a moment that like has had you reflect on the concept of repair or reparation in your own life.
I mean, I think it's a theme that for all of us probably comes up time and time again. I definitely, in the last few years, have been thinking about a friendship that I would have liked to have had repaired, and it hasn't been.
Yeah.
And like reflecting on my participation in that is something that has been on my mind a lot in the last year. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, we can seek repair, we can work towards it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be successful. Yeah.
It doesn't feel good to hear.
Yeah. And then there's also the times where you don't get to have the repair with people that are important to you, that you're hurting over something, and it's never resolved, but that relationship is maintained.
Yeah, and we get pictures of that in this episode too, which is fascinating. But it's one of the things that I was really on this watch with this lens was really kind of pulled towards was the emotional labor that people have to do when repair is either happening or has not happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so often unseen. And I hope that through our discussion we can kind of understand that a little bit more, because I think that that will perhaps help me be more generous with people, um, but I don't know yet. We'll see.
I feel like we see that even more clearly in another episode when Viren's writing to Soren.
Yes.
I think that like that is so clear in that episode. It's like that idea of, you know, I would say like a stereotypical version of that is you're mad at someone and they're like, "You're right, I'm the worst. I'm so terrible." And then it's like, "Good. Yeah, go away with that. It's not my job to make you feel better about being terrible." You know?
Yeah, there's okay. I'm so excited. This is gonna be such a good conversation. Okay. Before we dive in, because I'm getting antsy. Before we do it, we have to do our due diligence.
Okay.
And give our listeners a 30-second recap.
Okay.
Which means we're both going to be on the spot to deliver this entire episode in 30 seconds or less.
Okay.
Do you want to go first, or do you want to go second?
Okay, let me go first so I don't steal your ideas.
Okay, I'm going to put a timer on the clock.
Okay, I'm scared.
And I'm going to count you down. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
So we're at the Storm Spire. They're like, "You need to kill the beast because the prophecy." And Rayla's like, "Nah." And Calum's like, "But there's a prize." And then Viren's in the dungeon. He's being sad. Soren drops off lunch. Callum tells Rayla to get on the behemoth, carve out its soul, rune, blah, blah, blah. She's like, "No, it's a pet." And so then she sings a lullaby and everything's good. And then they're the cult leader in the sky elf. Everyone can take off their blindfolds. Cosmo becomes time blind and Viren's dealing with the consequences of his dark magic addiction. Boom.
Ding! Yes! Boom indeed! Excellent job. Wow. Okay, most people are not that good on their first run, so that was excellent. Well done. Okay, will you count me in?
Oh my god, I don't have my cell phone. I don't have my timer. Okay, I'll watch yours.
You You just tell me when to go.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the chosen two grapple with being the chosen two. Are they chosen or are they just, things? And then Soren's like, I don't have feelings. And then Ezran is, but feelings. And Viren and tries to unload, but it's bad. Viren's like, give me the things, Soren. And then Callum melts some ice, and then they find the behemoth, and then they work together, and they realize it's a Drago pet. And then Rayla's like, oh my god, singing, and it's beautiful, moon opal. And then the Quasar diamonds, baby. And then, Callum has some dark magic from time blindness. And then what's going on? And then Soren sad and walks away crying, and then Rayla
Done.
metal parent. I did it.
Oh my god, yours was so good.
Oh, thank you. I was like, I didn't finish. I don't know that I got everything.
No, I thought you did really good. You got lots of feelings in yours. Oh my god, I'm embarrassed.
Hey, no, we both did excellent. I think this is the best, like double 30-second recap that y'all are gonna get in a while. So just saying. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off and go straight to you and say, what is the moment that you want to talk about first? What's a moment of repair that comes up for you as you watch this episode?
I mean, obviously, I think like Viren's relationship with Soren.
Yeah, that's definitely like let's address the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah. Like like reparation with a parent,
Oof.
so tough. But as I don't have any kids, so I've only seen it in the opposite direction, right? I've only experienced it of being the child. So, the emotional depths that Jason takes us to with Viren. And he is a father, so I mean,
Yeah, it's wild. I like Jason's such a fun person, generally speaking, and every time we talk, it's been such a good experience. And I can just imagine like him being in the room and like feeling the things so hard as he's doing the work, where he's like has to pause and breathe because of how emotional a toll it is to read these lines in the way that he does. I have no experience with that, but I could imagine that being the experience just from listening to it.
mm,
Uh, it's so charged. There's just so much emotional charge to every single line that he speaks to Soren in this. Um, so the question I think when I think about this is there's so many. Okay, starting with thinking about there's an assumption underneath all of this, especially in the beginning when Soren is coming down, and he says it out loud. Viren says, "You're coming down here for a reason. You are of the Crown Guard. You could send anyone to do this, and yet you're the one coming. You must want to speak with me." And I felt some kind of way about that assumption, and I'm curious how you felt about that statement, or if it crossed your mind even, because the reason I think it came up for me was he's in a position of trying to ask something of Soren, like, and to make an assumption, even if he's right, feels like the wrong move to voice out loud. But I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts were on that moment, or if it even
well,
if you
I'm
even know about it.
yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that makes this show so gripping is the truthfulness of it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think in these moments in our lives where we're in deep emotional despair and need for connection that we're always going to say the right thing. I think that what we saw with Viren was a very human.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First, he wants connection. He knows his son wants connection. He wants to repair the relationship. He wants, I don't know if he expects forgiveness, but of course that would be his like a objective is to repair, maybe not to have forgiveness, but to have a relationship with his son,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So it just felt very human to me.
Yeah. And I think that's if I were to walk away knowing that I am going to I'm going to err. I am human. I'm going to make a mistake, and if I could learn from Viren here, the takeaway for me do I become aware in that moment or prior in my consideration of how to approach the person who I've made a significant error with? How do I consider how to approach them in a way that will not put them in a position the way Viren puts Soren in a position in this moment, where um, I think he gets there at the end, and I think that's the difference. Is he says, "I what is the line? It was never your fault, and if you don't accept my words now, I want you to have them in the future when you might need them." And that line for me was like top tier
Mm.
apology. Like that is beautiful because I want you to hear these words, and you may not believe them now. You may not be ready to hear them. There's so many barriers that might be up, but I want you to have heard them so that later on you can hopefully hear their truth. Um,
I just feel like this arc for him, it's not completed within this episode.
so,
Like this arc, I feel like we only get to sort of Viren's midway point.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, there's so much more to this conversation and this dance between them that carries on that it's, yeah, I just don't feel it completes. Like, I think he is definitely still striving for something from Soren, but you know, what we want from an outside perspective is for him to find it within himself and not actually have any needs from Soren. But
Agreed.
it's just, you know, if he knew that from the outlook, it wouldn't be real.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if we think about it from Soren's perspective too, I think just to name what hopefully is fairly obvious, I would imagine, is just like the amount of manipulation that he's experienced from Viren in the past that has not been repaired. Right, so there's been incident after incident after incident of gaslighting, flat out lying, emotional abuse, like that has just never been repaired. And it got to the point where Soren chose to remove himself from the situation, right? And that makes so much sense, right? And then this parent who we saw like 3 seasons of Viren building remorse, right? And we it took 3 seasons, right? And I don't know exactly how much in story time that is, but you know he was dead for 2 years of that. But like, but you know, there's so much time where it took him to realize his mistakes, and it took Claudia going over the line to a certain extent as well to get to that point. And it makes so much sense that Soren is so resistant to his words when there has been no effort to repair until now. Am I naming that right? Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that their storylines have been separated for so long at this point that it's probably a tough pill for Soren to swallow that his dad comes back and he's like, "Oh, but I'm good now."
Yeah.
Cuz
Right.
the emotional, I don't know, processing, I don't know how to say this, that Soren would have required to switch teams essentially.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think often when we talk, because I think it's really hard to talk about repair without talking about forgiveness, which is kind of what you kind of mentioned just a second ago with Viren expecting something. Like there's often this undercurrent of when I apologize, I'm not just doing it because I think I did wrong. I'm doing it because I want to be absolved of my feelings of guilt. And I think that's exactly kind of what you've been naming around Viren being human, around the words he's saying are, I need to be absolved of my guilt. And it isn't until later, and especially with this um, letter that he's eventually going to write, that he gets to the point where it's not about my needs, it's about Soren's just a really hard pill to swallow, and I understand why people are so resistant to it at first. Um, I guess my question is, how is there a way to expedite that process? Is there a way to kind of, um, with more awareness, with a deeper understanding of self, to come to that realization sooner? And I don't, that is not a rhetorical question, but it's also I don't expect you to have the answer.
Big question. Yeah. Wow. I think that for me, you know, part of it is realizing your faults and not beating yourself up about them and accepting them. And instead of, you can be like, oh, I want this person to forgive me and then I'll feel better. Or you could say, well, what do I want? I want us to be having a good time. I want this to, so how can I make that happen in another way without them having to do emotional labor for me? How can I earn their forgiveness rather than asking them to give it to me? How can this fracture be forgotten, even if it's not lingered on, even if I don't get an open forgiveness? What do I want? I want this relationship to feel good. And so, how can I approach that from a different direction? Is sort of where I'm at in my growth as a human, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's it, right? Is rather than prioritizing my my needs, right? It's prioritizing the relationship, right? And in order for the relationship to thrive, it's not a bid for forgiveness. It is a bid for, how do I name that? The other person who has been who has perceived harm, they need to feel safe first, right? And so if I'm aiming for repair, my goal is, even if I feel hurt, even if I feel like I'm struggling and need something, it's to prioritize the other person, right? Um, which is so counterintuitive, right? Especially because I think what is an unsaid need is, like, we're neurobiologically wired for connection, love, and belonging. And when we perceive that that is threatened, we go into survival mode, and it's often eliciting a trauma response from us where we are like, oh no, my survival is literally at stake. I have to do anything possible to repair that. And to put that aside is so counterintuitive, but it's the exact thing we need in order to actually prioritize relationship, which is a tough pill to swallow on any day, much less on when this is your son.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like, and also we all have different traumas, we all have different histories, and so we're all looking at this through different lenses. So, what's right for me or you or Viren is maybe not the same thing that someone else might be working on. It's, yeah. These are big questions.
Right? This is you
This
picked this
show.
word. Yeah, but this show too, right, is tackling big things. No joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. This is so good. So, is there anything else kind of about this moment, or about this series of moments in this episode between Viren and Soren, that we want to unpack, or think about through a lens of repair?
I mean, I need I need somebody to repair my heart because the burning of, Viren just desperate to explain himself and connect and defend and his need. And then also, you know, I keep likening it to addiction.
Mm.
You know, well, when someone is addicted, they can become quite manipulative. They can tell lies. A lot of things can be in service to that addiction. And I think that Viren's relationship with dark magic for me is very reflective of that, and Soren's inability to trust that there has been a change is because of this constant being secondary to this addiction. So that kept coming up for me in this episode and the next. And at the end, when Viren at the end of this episode, he's like, no, no, you're not going to use me anymore. Like, trying to break free of something that has made his life easier. But over time, for anyone that is drawn in, be it Viren or Claudia or Callum, we see that this tool that they use to make life a little bit easier destroys them. How can we not see that as a reflection of addiction?
No, I don't think I've ever put my finger right on that analogy, but I think it's very useful as in terms of what it does, and especially we see it with Callum, right? There's this immediate like need of like, well, you could do this way, which is the dark magic way, or you can learn the true arcanum of the sky, which is like we see him spend a season getting to the point where he has to do that in the first season and second season, regardless. But like it's a lot of work and a lot of understanding and a lot of labor required to get to that point with any arcanum. And then that just means you have access to it. You don't even have all of the inner workings and the ability to do the runes and all of the verses. All I got to do is this and say this word and kill this thing. And it is a shortcut, right? And it's fascinating to think about because the way addiction functions is it is a chemical response in our brain, right? Where we get a reward whenever whatever thing we do that we are addicted to, whether it's sugar, whether it's a drug, whether it's Netflix, whether it's a certain position, whether it's all these kind of things. And I can see how every time Claudia or Viren or Callum uses this thing, it's a reinforcement of that behavior of saying, see, it works. You feel bad afterwards, but the result is worth it. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah, a lot of verbal processing. Sorry.
no, and even the idea of you think you've overcome this addiction, and then we see Viren who is, he's on the mend, he's not using dark magic anymore, but it's still on his back and maybe always will be. He's always going to have to fight well, hopefully no, but to not need to use it because in his head, well, I could use dark magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because there's also a clear positionality where I've had conversations with people on prior episodes about the morality of dark magic, right? And you see this a lot on the fan discussions too, around like, no, I think dark magic is the clear answer. Would you rather feed a whole country or take out a titan, a rock titan, one rock titan for the entire betterment of the entire country? And in my head, I'm like, well, I mean, that's a pretty good trade. But that's also a life for something. And so this negotiation of ethical consideration that people are uh, forgetful of when it really comes down to it, and when you have to make that decision, the spiritual toll that takes as well. And I don't know. We could have a whole dissertation probably on the ethics of dark magic, but um, that is neither here nor there. um, okay, I would love to have a conversation about this expedition that Rayla and Callum are going on. How would you feel about transitioning that
Yeah, let's
direction?
do it.
So this whole transition is really interesting, right? We have this story, but I want to bring us to the beginning of it with this beginning piece where Callum is saying maybe there is something. They're grappling with being this chosen two, and initially Rayla is like, "So we're leaving, right? Because this is a weird. We're not actually doing this." And well, he's like, "Well, maybe there is something we can do about this." And way she points it out to him is that you're the person who said a destiny is a book you write yourself. Like this is something that you're the author of, and here you are giving into this, you know, fate, this prophecy, and I'm wondering if this generous read of the woo-woo-ness of fate and prophecy is like ultimately what leads them to take this on, right? And I'm wondering if there's a way. This is kind of a meta question, but we can repair our own generosity of these reads. Where I'm a cynic at heart, and I will proudly own that. But I also have this like desire for spiritual connection and spirituality as well. And I'm wondering if a generous read of spirituality or prophecy or fate is healthier than not. And that's just again, it's a big question. I don't know. But that line reminded me of that.
I mean, obviously, I think a generous read of anything is always the right answer. I definitely think that Rayla leans more into the cynicism of the moment, and there's some definite cult vibes um, at with this particular branch of elves. I think, like God, even the leader, his outfit, come on. But pardon me.
To be fair, he can't see. So.
Oh yeah, well, he did at one point, okay? And just like, this group and they listen to the elder and they're all believing in this
Yep.
prophecy, but just literally blindly believing in what some old man is telling them, some old elf. So, yeah, I see the cynicism there. She feels the way I would feel. But I also feel that, there's this long ship going on, and she's not going to say no to Callum for anything. But they've got stuff to do. And she's like, what? And the other thing that they so clearly are the chosen two. Like, I don't think anyone at any point is like, nah, it's probably another elfin mage. Like, it's them. They are the chosen two, for sure. But I think Rayla's like, we got stuff to do.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I love how you kind of lifted this up of like they are clearly um, for each other, right? This like Rayla's not going to say no to Callum, and we see later on that Callum's not going to say no to Rayla, right? Where there's this so much trust, and they have to call each other out on it a few times throughout the series, where it's like, trust me, this is the way, and then they give in. But there's this there's this assumption between the two of them that the other one knows best and knows at least knows best for each other and for the moment and has their each other at heart.
If they're
And
willing to say it, if they're willing to say, trust me, then they know.
yeah,
Then they're sure.
yeah, that I think you're right. That element of communication does seem to be necessary. Um, but it's interesting to me that you know Callum is not only is he coming from this place of being a dark mage, right, of having access to that power, but this is very reminiscent of, and it harks back to this moment between Viren and Harrow when they're taking on the Titan or the Golem or whatever it is in season 1 or 2 or 3, where they're taking that thing out, and Viren's like, you have to do it, and we have to kill it because we need it, and that's exactly what Callum is yelling: is you have to do it, you have to take it out because that's what's right. And Rayla says no, and instead of Viren doubling down, instead we have Callum giving into this trust, and I think there's an interesting parallel between the two, and when we I wonder what would have happened under a repair lens if Rayla had failed. And this is purely speculative, obviously, because they succeeded, right? But
Mm-hmm.
Callum is withholding the prize of Quasar diamonds, right? And he trusts Rayla, is is going to make the decision that is best and is willing to not give her all of the information in letting her make that decision. So I don't know. There's a part of me that is wondering how she would have responded if it didn't go the way that it did. What would have repair looked like? Of, hey, I knew this was on the line, and you probably would have made a different decision if you had all the information. That was a whole lot of meandering. I apologize, but I'm curious if anything bubbled to the surface while I talked about that.
Um, I don't know. It's hard because there's so many what ifs in Rayla's journey. Like, we could go right back to episode 1. Like, what if she had killed the guard?
Yep.
You know? And I think we can live in the what ifs, but when it comes down to it, I think that Rayla tends to lead with empathy. She actions with empathy. And I think that's something that's so special about her, something that I wish I could take from her and learn from her. So I'm not sure how much I can live into the idea of her having made a different choice because, you know, like Callum, I trust her to make the right choice.
So, you know, part of this show is trying to, how do we learn better by treating this show sacredly, by learning from these characters, by learning from these decisions. How do we learn better to treat others sacredly in our own lives?
Mm-hmm.
Use this kind of as a model. What we see here in this parallel between Callum and Viren, and in this moment more narrowly, I think what we see is leaning on our people what even when the outcome seems counter to what we've been working towards. But really trusting and leaning into that trust, knowing that I think what it is it's knowing that repair is possible, because these two have gone through harm and repair with one another multiple times, and what we've seen is that they can come out through it. And so I think they're more willing to trust one another when repair is a possibility that they have already grappled with, which is, again, kind of counterintuitive when you have not built that relationship with someone. But
I mean, I want to push back against that a little bit because I think in this moment the success came out of the fact that, yes, Rayla, she was on the cynicism train. She trusted she's going to do what Callum wants. She trusts him. But when it comes down to it, she can't ignore herself. She also needs to trust herself. And I think in good relationships, we trust one another, and there's not always one leader. It depends on the situation, you know?
Yeah.
It definitely, you can think of like, if I need to fix a sink, I know who I trust to ask those questions to, you know? But with that same person, no trust that they can navigate themselves through a mall, you know? So it depends on the scenario. So having the trust within a relationship that both parties have something to give and take, I think that is an important lesson as well. Sometimes we need to trust in ourselves because we have the answer, and that's the right thing for the relationship.
I'm coming back to this definition that we mentioned at the beginning around like the full acceptance of our collective, right? Um, and having the discernment process to know that's kind of what you're kind of pointing to, is this idea of being able to determine when to go to a specific person, or when to put trust in one person versus another, or to put trust in yourself versus someone else.
And to not always rely on someone for the answers, but to come as an equal party.
Yeah, like this element of I think, of humility, in the sense of humility is an accurate measure of self and not an inflated or deflated, right? It's an accurate measure where I know that Callum is good at X, Y, and Z, but I also know that I'm good at these things and knowing when to leverage those things. Oh, that's huge. Um, it also like this is fascinating because I think for Rayla, that's a big piece of this, where she is able to discern the underlying feelings. Because I think for most people who are familiar with baseline therapy, we know that anger is a secondary emotion, often masking something else. And Rayla quickly is like, this is not an angry beast. This is a grief torn pet. And that change of language is really interesting, right? Because as Luna's versus Pet, like it is on an angry rampage, but it is kind of masking this undercurrent of grief and missing their would be parent. And it's only with information that she is able to come to that conclusion and make that realization. And anybody else without that information is going to say kill the beast, right? Because it's a terror on this land, and that's what the elves were trying to do. They were saying you need to get rid of it. You need to pierce the heart of the beast, and this interpretation of this prophecy. And I think what I'm learning about from Rayla is not only is having more information obviously going to lead to a greater potential for repair, but also being able to discern between the stories that we hear and the stories that we tell ourselves, and using this kind of collective, again, understanding to um, make decisions. Um, does that make sense? Does that seem right? Is that
Yeah, but I also like feel that it always brings me back to like episode 1, where she has to make this choice, and I really feel like it sets who she is. And so, society is saying one thing, and something that I love about Rayla is she in the moment is able to listen to herself and observe and not just go with the wave. And I
yeah?
think we see that here too.
So yeah, it's this balance for me between society and societal norms and integrity, where it seems like Rayla is really tapped into her own personal integrity of choosing courage over comfort, choosing um, practiced values over professed values. Um, and I think that seems to be what you keep pointing to when you talk about repair. And maybe is that a secret ingredient of repair? Is integrity a secret ingredient? I don't know, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, without integrity, then it's just ego, isn't it? You're just asking,
Yeah.
you're just playing a game, or you're going through the hoop, jumping through hoops to have forgiveness, doing what is you're supposed to do. But like actually seeking forgiveness is about, yeah, repairing,
Mm-hmm.
fixing something, making something feel good again, not just saying you're sorry.
Yeah.
Finding
Yeah.
ease again, finding ease after pain, that feels like reparation to me.
Ease after pain. Whew. This is a big lens.
I
This is a big
know.
one.
I mean, this is going to be the longest episode ever.
Oh man.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot.
Me too. And a lot of it is just verbal processing. I'm like, okay, wrapping my head around these big things that this children's show is trying to tackle also. Um, yeah, beautiful. Um, okay, uh, I think my this might be my last point. So
Okay, yeah.
we are making progress. I'm curious about your thoughts on. We briefly mentioned it at the very beginning, but talking about the burden of repair and the labor of it, and so the last thing that I think is coming up for me is talking about the burden of repair. And we briefly touched on it at the very beginning, but the emotional labor that is involved in repair and in not repairing. And what we see with Rayla is at one of the final scenes in the episode is her talking to her parents in these coins, and the burden of repair is on Rayla, but Viren is the one who did this thing, and there's this self uh, acceptance of the burden that Rayla has taken on. Excuse me, and she's not the person who did the crime, but even with that, there's these ripple effects that are kind of mentioned around what Rayla did in terms of being empathetic with the behemoth, the ice behemoth. But in terms of this repair, there's also the unseen ripples of when things go wrong and the labor that Rayla has had to put into this, the emotional labor that Callum has had to think about getting these quasar diamonds, the emotional labor of repair for when people make mistakes that is so unseen by Viren, right? Like Viren has no idea that all of these things are happening. There's this like, oh, that probably caused you a lot of problems, but I feel like I never really understand how much it affects another person when these mistakes happen.
Isn't
And
that
so,
like what karma is all about? Is like the ripples
yeah,
of our actions?
yeah, I mean, especially like if we believe in karma, then yes, that is a huge deal. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on the just generally speaking, the unseen labor of repair and for if we take us back to Viren and Soren, like Soren has been doing a lot of processing and emotional labor of like how do I deal with you, and even so, the emotional labor at the beginning where he's talking to Ezra and is not showing how much this is affecting him in front of Ezra, and even that is having to filter himself, and that's a form of labor too. And so I don't know. I was just kind of struck by the amount of unseen labor when it comes to mistakes. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know that I have a specific question, but I'm just curious what comes up for you when you think about the the emotional unseen labor of burden and repair.
I mean, I think that's just the human experience. Like, there are consequences to be paid when you make mistakes, even if they're accidental. And you can be miserable about them, or you can face them and deal with them, journal. Like, honestly, the letter, I mean, that's not this episode, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but I feel like the emotional processing, like, what can you do? We can't, there's going to be emotional labor. That's life. That's part of being a human being with a heart.
Yeah, yeah. I think I feel like I'm called to because I know that I also do a lot of unseen labor, as does everybody. But I think I often just tell myself that like, especially when I'm the one who wants an apology or wants something to be fixed or wants somebody else to do the work of the repair because I was the one who was harmed or offended, that I feel called to be more generous in those regards and in those situations to just recognize that there's probably emotional labor that they are dealing with as well. And it's unfair, perhaps, to compare emotional labor when it's just unable to be seen on any side.
Yeah, and sometimes like we torture ourselves. Like you can want something from someone, but your forgiveness of them without them participating is actually probably less labor.
Yeah, yeah. You're pointing to the addiction is reminding me of like recovering alcoholics too. Of like part of the 12-step process is making amends, and there's so many narratives and so people who go to people that they've harmed that are just uninterested in being repaired and talked to, but it's like, do it for me, do it for my health. And it's just like this guilt trip that often accompanies repair, where it's again, it's this exchange of I'm doing this for me, not for the actual repair of the relationship. And I think that when it comes to repair, it's a recovering alcoholic like has to live with that illness for the rest of their life. And that's just the natural consequence of the choices that have been made. But at least they're not living like the drunken lie of not owning that um, as a consequence. Um, and I think that that's the thing is that part of the repair process is recognizing that there will be consequences and owning up to those consequences.
Yeah, and reparation doesn't happen in an instant. Like, you can have someone that has struggled with addiction in your life, and you can have been disappointed by them
Yeah.
for years and years and years. So then they come one day and they're like, okay, I'm better now. You're like, well, I've heard this before, so
Yeah.
let's see, you know?
And that I think I really appreciate your pointing out that like we're in the middle of this repair with Kieran and Soren too, because this and not even the middle, really the beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
um, we're only seeing a portion of it, and I think that as we can continue to see this build up, we're going to see more and more unfold. So it might be worth continuing to have like repair in the back of my mind as I look through
Mm-hmm.
this. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, so good. What else, if anything, is on your mind about this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've spoken a lot, so I don't need to delve in too deep. But then I was also thinking about, probably the foremost relationships that Rayla wants to repair are those with Runan and her parents. And she consistently sets them aside in a way that almost makes it framed. You see it like it's not something she's doing for them, it's something she feels she's doing for herself. And so it gets put aside. So that's quite interesting. That's something I noticed.
Good point. I don't know why I didn't put that together, but that's so true. Of like, I can't do this. I can't prioritize this because it's selfish, right? And that's so true that it's also other people on the line. So that's an interesting thing to bring up. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that. Oh, well, yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time. So I want to respect both of our times and take a short break. And then we'll come back for our final two segments. All right, everyone, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us. We have two more segments for you all, and y'all have been looking forward to our sacred practice, I'm sure. And we are continuing our practice from last episode, which is Lectio Divina. And again, for everybody who might be hearing that for the first time, it translates to divine reading, and it's Latin, and it stems from a traditionally a Christian practice and it involves reading originally scripture in a meditative way. And instead, what we're doing is we're translating this onto the Dragon Prince. And so it's intended essentially to help people develop a closer relationship with the sacred by listening with your heart and engaging with the whole self. And so in our adaptation of this, we are using a line from the Dragon Prince that I pulled somewhat randomly and from a pin drop in the episode. And the first line that came up from my pin drop was the following: We can return the starlight to them. And so step one, Paula, is the literal meaning, where essentially, if you envision a ladder that we put like on this line in the text of the script, we're just going to climb further down into the show using this line. And the first rung on the ladder in our climbing down into the depths of the meaning is the literal meaning. And so, since I pulled it, I have the literal meaning ready to go, which is Callum is in the beginning kind of riffing on wanting to return to the starlight, to the elves, who this, as you mentioned, this kind of culty feeling of never having um, looked at the stars or looked at anything because of their customs. And Callum's like, we can do this. We can totally do this. We can return the starlight to them. And so that's what's literally happening. Um, does that sound right to you? Do you remember anything else about that scene?
No, that's right.
Cool. All right. So step two, which is where it starts to get fun, is the allegorical meaning. And so for us, that is, what does this line remind us of in the rest of the show, in other works of fiction, in other stories, generally speaking? And so I'll read it once more and see what it kind of reminds us of. We can return the starlight to them.
I mean, the first thing that I think of is, the idea of being separated from the thing that you live for.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, because these are, these star-touched elves, right? That are
Not getting touched by the stars.
not exactly. It's like the thing that they kind of live for.
But they're skywing elves, right?
I mean, yes. Sorry. Yeah. We're not talking about Aaravos. No, but yeah, these Skywing elves, right? Or this sect of Skywing elves, even that are all about the stars. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think you know for some reason the word starlight was really picking up for me, and I was reminded of like moonlight and starlight and how often like there's like I'm reminded of this dancing in the moonlight, dancing in the moonlight. That song I'm reminded of. Um, Starlight, Star Bright, my how we see tonight, or what the traditional nursery rhyme of Pinocchio, like wishing upon a star. I'm reminded of as well. Um, and so I guess it reminds me of this like returning that childhood uh, wonder and childhood fancy, I guess, is something that I'm reminded of as I
Mm.
think about returning starlight to someone. Um, what else, if anything, comes up for you?
It feels like they want to return to the Skywing elves the thing that makes them them. You know,
Mm,
every if we see the other communities of elves, they all have this connection that
yeah,
is
yeah,
how they are distinguished from each other.
yeah.
You know, the sun
That's
seed for the
that's a good point, right? Yeah. So this anchoring point for each group. Um,
and
well,
here.
that's so cool too, with the sunseed being stolen and being used
Mm-hmm.
for a purpose that is not what Janai wanted. I guess it is what Kareem wanted. Um, but yeah, fascinating stuff. Okay,
Kareem's the worst.
yeah, I have strong feelings.
Ugh.
I've
Ugh.
been trying to mitigate my feelings for for Kareem, but
Because Janai's the best.
we love Janai, right? Like, it's really hard to temper my immediate negative judgment of certain characters.
Ugh.
Uh, it's hard. But okay, so we have kind of gone into like what this reminds us of allegorically. We were reminded of the other races. We're reminded of other stories, and there's a little bit of childlike experience. There's a little bit of like the essential thing that makes us us. And so now we're going to climb a little bit deeper and go into the personal meaning. So the next rung on the ladder is we've talked about it literally, allegorically, and now we're going to talk about it on a personal level. And so when you hear the phrase, we can return the starlight to them, I'm curious what it reminds you of in your own life.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a hard thing to pull up for me. I would say that I'm inherently like a very optimistic, driven, ambitious, and motivated person.
Mm.
And I think that, you know, throughout life, when we take on a lot, we get tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the moments in life where those feelings rush into me and I don't need to encourage them, I don't need to fabric them, I don't need to fabricate them, I don't need to fake them until I make it. When I just feel motivated and optimistic and ambition, like that's the starlight for me. That's who I feel like, that's who I am.
I love that. Oh, that's so good. Um, I think what I was reminded of is, you know, I think I went literal. Like I remember when I was younger, I used to go on long walks at night with my friends and just like walk in the dark, and used to walk golf courses and things like that. Probably frowned upon by authorities, but I I did it anyway with my friends, and I think I miss the ability to just go out and just exist under the stars and be human.
Mm.
And um, yeah, this recovery of like what feels like it has been lost in the adulting portion of my life. Um, oof. Okay. Well, uh, that is our personal meaning, right? So we're gonna climb one more down, and then that will be the end of this practice. But giving us one more chance to think about what this might look like. And there's two ways you can think about this next step on the ladder. One is, what is this line now that we've talked about it calling you to do? What's a call to action that you are now feeling because of this discussion? Or, if you prefer, another way to think about it is if you were to use this line to offer a moral or a parable to someone, or give a lesson based off of this line to a child or a friend, what would that lesson be? And so either a call to action or a lesson based off of this line. And I'll read it one more time for us. We can return the starlight to them.
Yeah, I think for me, there's like a call to action to simplify,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that collects. And just to make sure you're surrounded by the things that make you feel like your authentic self rather than things that are being sold to you, maybe.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think this last read, I was paying attention to, for instance, for some reason, to the pronouns. So it's like we can return the starlight to them, and I think I feel called to think about what it looks like to be of service to others in terms of simplifying and in terms of helping people, like what can I do without it being like this is my responsibility, but like without kind of taking on that burden, but what can I do that would make it easier for people to live more authentically and
Mm.
return that simple being? And I guess I'm called to kind of meditate on that and think on what it is that I can do better to facilitate that process, not only for others but even for myself. Um, okay, we did it. That is an adaptation of Lectio Divina. So thank you so much for joining me in that. I know that that's some people see sacred practice and shy away, but you dove right in. So I really appreciate your willingness to join me in that. And that brings us to our last segment, which is gratitude. We'd like to end with being grateful for a character, and I would love to kind of hear a character from this episode that you're grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, gotta go with King Ezrin in this one. I mean, he's only in it for a flash, but the sensitivity with which he approaches Soren and the space that he gives Soren to be unsatisfied with the choices that he as king has had to make. I have a great appreciation for that. Like he has made a choice that could perhaps really upset his friend, and he's willing to go and give that person room to talk about that.
Huge. Oh, I'm a big fan. Ezra's always big in my book. Big fan. Um, you know, I think for me, I wanted to pick Stella this time. Uh, there's two moments that I'm really particularly grateful for where she seems to be like, really good at reading the room. And one is with Callum just is like starts talking and she just brings out the book and he just picks it up out of nowhere and it's as if like it was planned perfectly. But she's just so adept at reading needs on people, especially Callum and Rayla, that is really beautiful. That shows that she's paying so much attention. And the second time is with this moon opal for um, Esmeralda and with Rayla, and it just is having people or things or anything that is sentient around us that can read us like that is just what a gift. And so, and that's also a form of labor, right? Being able to read and be finely tuned to people. So I'm really grateful for that. I think I wish I were more adept at being like Stella.
Anticipating needs. Yeah, delightful.
I am delighted. Yes, absolutely. Okay, that brings us to the end of our show. You have been such a magnanimous guest. I'm so grateful for your generosity of spirit and your willingness to join me in this conversation.
Oh my gosh, you're too kind. That's so kind of you.
No.
It's not often that I get to delve into the show and chat with someone about it.
Yeah, well, I'm curious. Assuming that you are interested in being found, is there anything you want to share in terms of like if somebody's listening and wants to connect with you? Is there a handle that you want them to look for? Is there a Instagram?
Um, well, I'm on Instagram, Paula M. Burrows. Um, yeah, actually, I've got my focus on a completely different line of work at the moment. A friend and I are creating sewing patterns for home sewists right now. So that's the next thing for me that has all my energy right now and all my drive. Not that I'm not acting, I still am. There's lots of stuff happening in spring that are that was filmed in spring, but it's all in post production right now, so I can't really say anything about acting stuff at the moment.
Amazing. Well, if you are listening and you want to be posted when those things arrive, I imagine following you on Instagram might be a great way to
I
stay
think that'd be a
updated.
good start. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I encourage you to follow Paula M. Burrows on Instagram and check that out if you're there. You can always connect with us at BNB_pod on all the things, especially our Patreon, where we post live episodes once a month, and you can join those if you're a supporter. And so we hope you're there, and we hope that you enjoyed this episode with Paula and enjoy the rest of this season and season 7 when it comes out in December. Um, Yeehaw. Okay, Paula, this has been exceptional. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been a lovely morning.